Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. Barry Jones with SP History, continuing our Deep State series. We did a long video yesterday on the covert operation, sort of the mother of all covert operations. Everything's sort of been working towards this moment, and it was called ZR Rifle. And when I began this series 34 chapters ago, in part one, I said one of the objectives I had was to show, first of all, how the deep state came to be and how the public and private sectors mixed and adopted ultravires and began acting treacherously towards the American people, but over time began acting uh, with committing treason. And I've given you example after example where they've committed various acts of treason. The definition, there's four parts to it: aiding and abetting the enemy, betraying one's country, overthrowing one's government, and killing the king. And until ZR Rifle, uh, most of the treason had been items 1 through 3: aiding and abetting the enemy, betraying one's country, and or overthrowing. Well, we hadn't even got to we'd seen an attempt during the Roosevelt administration to overthrow the government, but we'd not seen anything succeed in that area. But when the ZR Rifle operation commenced and was finished, and they tied it off, they had successfully committed treason in all four ways. And so this is why I call it the mother of all covert operations. In fact, it uh, it satisfies, if you're looking at from a definitional standpoint, it satisfies several different uh, areas. For example, the definition of the deep state is the national security apparatus and all the public sector national security apparatus would be like CIA, Pentagon, FBI, national government, etc. And the private sector corporations that feed it. And of course, we're going to go through this today briefly because I want to file this as an addendum to yesterday's chapter 34. Couple, the video went on for an hour and 40 minutes. It was getting too long. So I wanted to add this today as an addendum because before we move on to the next topic, this was necessary to include with yesterday's topic. So sort of ties it off. Anyway, ZR Rifle, more so than any other operation to date, incorporates public and private sector, which I'll show you in a minute. And the merging of these two obviously brings in the operating principle of ultravires, which is in this case to maximize benefits to the cabal, the treasonous cabal, to the plotters, to disregard completely the public interests, and lastly, to provide immunity for all the plotters involved so that none of them faced any liability whatsoever. And you see that more. So far, it is everything we've been talking about has been working towards this moment. We've been showing examples of the merging of public and private sectors. We've been showing examples of ultravires being practiced, being the operating principle in public and private. We've been showing examples of treason, but we've never had everything, the whole ball of wax. And as I mentioned, this operation includes all the facets of treason, aiding and abetting. This is during the Cold War. And by killing the king, overthrowing the government, betraying the country, we aided and abetted our Cold War enemies and became just like them. We were used to seeing overthrows, coups d'etats in other countries. We were used to seeing Soviet premiers being shuttled in and out, in and out, in and out, and having violent revolutions, etc. This didn't happen in America until 1963. Now all of a sudden we're just like everybody else. There's no distinction. There's no difference, and everybody knows it. It's the worst kept secret in the world. Everybody knows it. I did a whole video on the reaction of the world after the assassination, and how everybody knew it was the biggest. It was the biggest fraud. The Warren Commission was the biggest fraud perpetrated on the American people, and because the rest of the world knew exactly what happened. And if you really want to get to the bottom of it, you need to access Cuban intelligence, or talk to Charles de Gaulle in France. He knew what happened. Or talk to Nikita Khrushchev in the Soviet Union. He knew what happened. Everybody knew except the American people. The American people were defrauded, or a fraud was perpetrated on the American people, and we bought it hook, line, and sinker. And so now the rest of the world knows America is, in name only, a democratic republic, because they have just succeeded in violently overthrowing their king, their duly elected, democratically elected king. Popular sovereignty is no longer the rule of the day. It's now this treasonous cabal that's running the show, just like every other country around the world. So they're just like us. That's the real outcome of the assassination of JFK and this covert operation ZR rifle, is it debased America, this grand experiment, this democratic experiment. And from that point forward, we've lost moral standing around the world. We no longer can point our finger at other countries and say, follow our example. They look at us as worse than frauds because we're hypocrites. We like to pretend we have the moral high ground, but they know the truth. And so, it's one thing to own up to your deficiencies, to your moral failings. It's another thing to pretend like it didn't happen and go on your merry way and expect everybody else to keep following you. We are essentially like the emperor with no clothes. That's the upshot of November 22nd, 1963, and this covert operation that over 100 years we saw building to that point where the corporate heads who are only interested in maximizing their profits, who don't care about public interest and always immunize themselves, that attitude has bled into the public sector to such an extent that now these folks have operated with immunity for so long, they believe they can do anything they want and get away with it. And anything includes treason. They don't care about the consequences. It's just about profits. It's just about making money. We're going to get into later, in a later episode, the payoffs for all the conspirators. And they all go back to money. Every last one of them. That's that same, it's that maximizing of the benefit or the profits. And money and power, money and power, money and power. That's what the treasonous cabal was after. And now that we've been exposed on a world stage, we have no standing going forward. It's why we've lost, as I said, the moral high ground. And countries now realize the truth about the United States of America and who's really running the show. And so it really weakened the office of the president substantially. And of course, we'd kind of been on that course for several years, for a long time. These deep state operators had been pushing the presidents around on a chessboard like a pawn for years. They'd never killed him in broad daylight. And now this is an example of future presidents of what happens if you don't behave, if you don't fall in line. And we're no different than a third world banana republic now. That's the real sad consequence. For short-term gain, financial gain, or short-term power, access to power, we sold, like Esau in the Bible, our birthright. We sold something that our founding fathers worked so hard to build, and succeeding generations worked so hard to defend. In a few short years, the lifespan of the ZR rifle program was 3 years. So let's just use that. In a few short years, 3 years, we threw it all away. We threw it all away. I wanted to look at I call this series the Treasonous Cabal. So let's look at the Treasonous Cabal. Who was it, and who fell on? Sometimes we get so caught up in who fired from what rooftop or from what window, or who did this and who did that, that it minimizes. Those folks were mechanics. They were hired hands. They were mercenaries. It minimizes or hides or cloaks the real perpetrators, the ones who did all the planning, signed off, and created the operation to begin with, and made it possible. So let's talk about if there was such a thing as a meeting, and there never was, I don't believe. But if there had been such a thing as a meeting where the perpetrators for ZR Rifle got together in a room and laid out the plans, drew it up, and assigned each other different roles to play. What I want to do today quickly is to just go through and show who those people would be, those entities. As you know, if you followed my other YouTube channel, Standards Plus History Academy, I go through the entire JFK assassination. I think there's like 150 videos on it. So, and I named 5 conspirators, and the CIA/Pentagon is one, and of course I include the FBI. The national security apparatus is one. LBJ is another. The Cubans, the Cuban Americans, the Cuban refugees are another. The organized crime is another, and the Secret Service is the 5th. Those are my 5 conspirators. And of those 5, not all of them are created equal, because at the very top of this pyramid is Alan Dulles, who I believe spearheaded this. Now by this point, in 61, when he authorizes this plan, signs off on it, he and his deputies, Richard Bissell and Richard Helms, Richard Helms later becomes the director of CIA himself, they sign off on this in 61. Remember, the creation document was written up by Harvey and Silver 6 days after Kennedy came into office. And it went operational 5 months, May of 61, after JFK took the oath of office. This is after Bay of Pigs. The decision's been made. Now, by the time it commenced and it finished and ended 5 months after JFK's death, Alan Dulles is no longer in the CIA. He's been fired. Kennedy fired him. Bissell's no longer in the CIA. He too has been fired. But Alan Dulles never left Washington. He's sort of like the Barack Obama of the 1960s. It's been standard operating procedure, sort of a custom. When you're done serving time as president, you leave Washington, go back home, and you serve out the rest of your time doing humanitarian work, charity work, public service kind of work. You never criticize your successor, and you sort of become the old gray head, so to speak, wise man. Barack Obama defied all that, stayed in Washington, built a big home, and has been stirring the pot ever since. I think it's really been a negative outcome for America in general, because he won't let go. And the Democratic Party really doesn't have another titular head. He's sort of the E.F. Hutton that continues to call shots, he and Hillary both. And neither one of them are in office, but they're acting like they're still in office, sabotaging their successors instead of stepping away. That's sort of what Alan Dulles did. He never left Washington. And he just moved across town to Georgetown, his home, and people beat a path to his door. He was the unofficial head of the CIA, even after he was fired. The new head had no experience. Kennedy replaced him and put in a guy that really didn't have any intelligence background. He was more of a businessman, and he didn't know what he didn't know. And they kept it that way. And Alan Dulles subverted the new head of the CIA by sort of going around him or going over his head. And all the powers that be continued to answer to Alan Dulles unofficially rather than to the new CIA director. So he worked to undercut the CIA going forward. He just couldn't let go, like Obama just can't let go. So I would put them at the top of the triangle. Allen Dulles is right at the top. That operation came to be with it being distinct from executive action, which was to target a foreign head of state on using foreign mercenaries on foreign soil. ZR Rifle was to target an American target on American soil using CIA assets. So it was CIA through and through. Everyone who was a part of this was either CIA in the sense that they were assets or officers or agents, or they had a role to play from the private sector because in their capacity as a corporate head, they had money they could finance, or they had access to hitmen that could perform cleanup operations, whatever. We'll get into that. But all the decisions were made at the CIA level. And so I put Allen Dulles right at the top of the triangle. And of course, his deputies were Bissell, Helms, and then the guys he put in charge of the program were Harvey and Silk. They drew up the documents. And of course, we all know Harvey, if he's involved in anything, it has an assassination component to it, because that was his area of expertise. So then under ZR Rifle in this program now, it necessitates the involvement of other parts of the CIA, not just Division D, Harvey's division. James Angleton was necessary. As we learned in the creation documents, they were going to create a patsy, someone that could take the blame. And so that would require a fake 201 file, a personnel file, CIA file, because it had to be an actual agent. And it would be tainted with Russian intelligence service taint, so as to create the impression that this patsy was a Russian asset. So we could lay the blame for the assassination at the feet of Russia, Soviets. And of course, Angleton was the counterintelligence chief of CIA. He was in charge of the Russia fake defector program. You remember, we learned yesterday that 10 days after the creation documents were written up, Lee Harvey Oswald, who was part of this fake defector program, petitioned for his return to America. That had to be handled by Angleton. He was in charge of that whole fake defector program. And then he created the fake 201 file and began the process of sheep dipping Oswald for the next 2 years as a Russian stooge, the Marxists, the Soviet plant. David Atlee Phillips was the Mexico City station chief. If you remember, that Mexico City station was headquarters for ZR Rifle. So obviously he's going to be involved. His expertise was disinformation. That's how he rose to the ranks and became the Western Hemisphere, chief of Western Hemisphere for the CIA. And so his contribution was the Mexico City disinformation campaign. The story that Oswald, shortly before the assassination, had traveled to Mexico City, met with Valery Kostakov, the Russian assassination expert, tried to get a visa to go to Cuba for an escape hatch after the assassination. Turned out the whole thing was false, or in Hoover's words, bullshit. But that was David Atlee Phillips doing. And of course, David Atlee Phillips was spotted all around Dallas. In fact, he was spotted with Oswald in Dallas prior to the assassination. And he was in Dallas doing another part of his job, which was to handle the doppelgangers. There was an extensive list of doppelgangers who went around Dallas performing very public and very incriminating towards Lee Harvey Oswald acts, so as to create this record that they could drop on the media after the assassination, of all these witnesses who saw somebody who looked like Oswald doing something very suspicious, acting very suspicious, or doing something very incriminating in the days and weeks leading up. That was all handled by David Atlee Phillips. I must say, David Atlee Phillips did a crummy job. He had too many doppelgangers, and it turned out to be pretty obvious that they were trying too hard to set up somebody, in this case Oswald, because they had in some cases, they had two doppelgangers in two different places at the same time, while Oswald was on record being at work at the Texas School Book Depository. In other words, there were three Oswalds at the same time in three different places. That's a mistake. He also screwed up the Mexico City story when he provided pictures that were clearly not Oswald. And when he got caught, he tried to say that there were tape recordings, and the FBI said, "Well, give us the tape recordings." He said they were lost, and all he would do is provide transcripts because he got caught. It was he was using. It wasn't Oswald who went to Mexico City, and he was also in charge of the summer of '63 sheep dipping of Oswald. Oswald spent the summer in New Orleans, running around leafleting, acting like a pro-Castro sympathizer, and under the handling Guy Bannister. But that was all arranged by, again, David Atlee Phelps, creating this legend, this cover story. It's all disinformation. Creating this disinformation cover story to be dropped on the American people shortly after the assassination, so as to fill the vacuum, so that the American people have something to grasp onto and believe now that they have the suspect. He's connected to the Soviets. He lived in the Soviet Union. He tried to go to Cuba. He met with Valery Kostikov, an assassination expert from the Soviet Union, shortly before he killed the president. I mean, it was just so convenient. It was all, that's what a cover story is. It's all prepared in advance so that when the time is right, you drop it. And it's been so meticulously prepared and laid out. And the doppelgangers have been doing their thing for 30 days, 60 days, 100 days, whatever, that it's an overwhelming amount of information. And in the absence of anything counter to that, like what would emerge in a trial, it looks like an open and shut case. A trial would undercut all of it. We'd find out pretty quick in a trial the Mexico City story was disinformation. We'd find out pretty quick there were too many doppelgangers. We'd find out pretty quick that the sheep dipping in New Orleans was contrived. But that's only in a trial. Of course, if you kill the patsy before the trial, there's no trial. Another part to ZR Rifle was here we get into the private sector, where companies who were CIA fronts, such as Riley Coffee and Bell Helicopter, provided cover jobs for CIA assets. Riley Coffee provided cover job for Oswald himself in the summer of '63. I should have mentioned the Texas School Book Depository. That was owned by Harold Dryholes Bird, one of the Texas oilmen that was financing this whole thing. That building was owned by him. And so that job was a cover job, just to get him in the right place. Bell Helicopter was a cover job for the Paynes and for QJ Wynn, who we discovered was June Cobb. So here you see a cooperative effort, public sector, private sector, helping out, doing what they can to provide cover for these CIA assets. And then, of course, June Cobb, appointed as the primary agent of ZR Rifle, whom we know as by code as QJ Wynn. And under her, where she was a CIA pilot, and her role was to fly the special passenger out of Dallas that day, whom we learned yesterday was the doppelganger, laying the trail, the incriminating trail that would lead to his arrest at Texas Theater. Under this ZR Rifle and June Cobb's leadership, you have your shooters who have already been trained. They've been trained since '61. This triangular fire team, we call it the S-Force. And these are all anti-Castro Cubans. They're experts with firearms. They've been trained by the CIA. William Rip Robertson, Carl Perkins, or not Carl Perkins, Carl Jenkins. I was thinking of the singer, Carl Jenkins, training him down on another private sector person's ranch, Clint Murchis's ranch down in Mexico. And they're using a high-powered rifle with scopes on a moving target, and using at least three teams of assassins to triangulate the fire. Everything that happened in Dallas that they had been training for years down in Mexico, and these are all CIA assets. Now they're Santos Traficante's men, ultimately, but they were brought in, recruited into the CIA operation, first as Operation 40 gunmen, and then as special assassins in this S-Force. So they've been on the CIA payroll. So they come into this operation as a ready-made assassination team. William D. Pauley, a civilian advisor, another private sector. He's not CIA, he's civilian, but he's sort of been an off-the-books covert operator since World War II. pilot himself, and he's best friends with Alan Dulles. And so, in his capacity, has a lot of money. He has boats, he has planes. He becomes the unofficial transport for the S Force in their different uh, operations that they are attempting to carry out before the actual assassination. I go through that in my JFK series, what the S Force was doing, uh, causing all kinds of trouble in Cuba. And the guy that seemed to transport them around on all these different operations was William D. Pauley. So here you see a blending again of private sector, public sector. Malcolm Mac Wallace, LBJ's hitman. Uh, he is recruited into this operation to fire the diversionary shot from the Texas School Book Depository. He's not firing a kill shot. He's just to get everybody's attention. And of course, we found his fingerprint, or I didn't, but investigators found his fingerprint on the boxes in the so-called sniper's nest. And it was a fingerprint that had it was like a 34-point match. And I think you need like 13 or 14-point match for it to be used in court. So it was clearly his fingerprint. And here again, you see one of the other conspirators providing an asset to the overall operation. In this case, it's LBJ providing his own personal hitman, Malcolm Mac Wallace, provide to carry out a certain role. Then you have Roscoe White, who's CIA. He is the what I believe was the Grassy Knoll shooter, later the Tippit shooter. He was the guy that's supposed to transport the special passenger out to the Redbird Airfield where June Cobb was waiting with the airplane. David Morales was a self-confessed CIA hitman. We know he was in the Daltex building, right there on the corner of Elm and Houston. And we know that because his spotter was arrested, James Eugene Braden. That was his spotter. They'd been in Chicago on November 2, 20 days earlier, trying to assassinate Kennedy there. Wherever you see Braden, you see Morales. Wherever you see Morales, you see Braden. And so we know he was there. And then organized crime, another private sector entity brought in, one of the conspirators brought in to perform special skills that they have. They have private sector. These are mechanics. We know that Charles Nicoletti, for example, was in the records building. We know that because witnesses in Dealey Plaza saw his face clear as day through the window and identified him by name when they saw the face in a police book, picture book. Charles Nicoletti was the Chicago crime family. He was a Chicago organized crime gunman. He was an assassin for the Chicago crime family. They provided pilots. Tosh Plumley, we know, flew in Johnny Rosselli that day. Johnny Rosselli was the liaison. His boss was Sam Giancana. Sam Giancana was head of the Chicago crime family. Johnny Rosselli was the liaison between CIA and the mob. He was in Dallas that day, brought there by a mob pilot, but also a pilot that worked for the CIA in Operation 40, Tosh Plumley. We know that the mob was involved in all the post-assassination cleanup. The witnesses who might talk, the loose ends. Well, you start with the first one. That's Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby was from Chicago. He was mobbed up, and his job was to take out Oswald so there would be no trial. Started with him and extended for years past that. So here you see Alan Dulles births this whole operation, and in cooperation with his deputies, picks two men to run it, who then assign different functions of the plot to different CIA assets or agents or officers like Angleton, like Phillips, to June Cobb, bringing in private sector people or entities that are involved in the plot that can contribute what their expertise is, such as Riley Coffey and Bell Helicopter and the Texas School Book Depository cover jobs, such as William D. Pauley transporting the S Force, such as organized crime. Hey, we need you guys to help provide transportation, also to take out potential troublesome witnesses to the narrative, etc. And then they brought in some of their own people, Roscoe White, David Morales, put them around Dealey Plaza along with the S Force. And man, by the time Kennedy arrives in Dealey Plaza. He's like a lamb being led to the slaughter. He has no idea just how exposed he is and what a poison pit he's walking into. And but this is the result of meticulous planning and lots of moving parts playing their part. Another group that would have been in the room. So I would have said, to answer my first question, who would have been in the room? Alan Dulles. In this original meeting, you probably only need Alan Dulles and William Harvey. Alan Dulles because he's the director, and William Harvey because he is in charge of all things assassination related. And he can inform Alan Dulles of everything he's going to need, everyone he's going to need, all the groups he's going to need to help, and all these other people fall in behind. They don't have to be at the original meeting. They just carry out whatever assignment. Yeah, you compartmentalize. This is a big operation. You compartmentalize it. Of all these names on here, the ones who know everything are the ones in the blue. Dulles knows, Bissell knows, Helms knows, Harvey knows, Silver knows. All the rest are on a need-to-know basis. They carry out what they've been assigned to do, their part, and they don't need to know everything. Another group that would have been in this meeting would have been the Suite 8F group out of Austin, Texas. The Texas gang, I call them. These are the LBJ folks that have run Texas like a little mafia for years. LBJ at the top, but it includes a bunch of lawyers, politicians, lawyers who set up all the schemes and the scams and all the pay-to-play grift that was benefiting LBJ and John Connolly, politicians like that, but also includes the folks with the money, the big oil people who have been financing LBJ's career all the way to the top, with the payoff being one day when he's president someday, they're going to get everything they want because they financed his career when he was a lowly congressman all the way up to the presidency, to the Oval Office. So they have hitched their wagons to LBJ. And so they are part of this Suite 8F. This was a actual hotel room downtown Austin in a building where they would meet. And they would sort of, like their own little version of a deep state running the state of Texas, this little cabal. That's what they did in Texas for years. And then they took their game to another level when LBJ became vice president and later became president. They were nicknamed the Suite 8F group. So that includes LBJ, who did his part, insisted that JFK visit Texas, actually, as part of a Southern strategy to win basically two Southern states, and that was Florida and Texas. And if you recall, when JFK came to Texas, it was after he'd just been to Florida. So the plan is, in the lead up to the 64 election, Kennedy is going to visit Florida and Texas over and over and over again. Those are the two states he's going to focus on. So LBJ insists Texas is necessary. So he sort of, they call it the the Johnson treatment, right? He sort of browbeats Kennedy into coming to Texas. And he becomes, in this plot, the guarantor for all the plotters of absolute immunity, because he's going to be the new president. So he gets to set up the commission, the Warren Commission, decide who's on it. He basically runs Texas, so he can shut down any investigation in Texas. He can move it all to Washington. And from there, he can put his friends in charge and control the investigation and keep the focus on Lee Harvey Oswald, the patsy. He also is the guarantor of all the payoffs that are going to come after the change in leadership from Kennedy to him. He's the one that's going to decide if there's a Vietnam War to happen. He's the one that's going to decide if the Kennedy Act or the oil depletion allowance is going to stay the same or get reduced, which is a huge concern to the big oil people. He's the one that's going to decide all the payoffs to everybody. He's the new president. So there is a built-in incentive there for this conspiracy to ingratiate itself to LBJ, knowing that whatever they're not getting from Kennedy, if they ingratiate themselves properly to LBJ, they will get a payoff when he becomes the new president. That's exactly what happened. John Connally is involved. He's the governor. Obviously, he's the one that invites JFK specifically to Dallas. So they sort of tag team JFK in the Kennedy campaign. You got LBJ pushing for it. You got Connally. One's the sugar and the other's the spice. LBJ saying, "Hey, we got to go." And John Connally is formally extending an invitation, and then when they decide to come to Texas and eventually to finish up the trip in Dallas, it's Connally and his people who insist on him speaking or ending up at the trademark, which is a completely undefendable location. The Kennedy people want to go to the Women's Building. And the reason for that is because if they didn't get him at Dealey Plaza, they were going to get him at the trademark. I do a couple videos on that, but you ever been inside that trademark? It's full of catwalks. Very easy for a sniper to take his position high up in the rafters of that building. It's an enormous building. It's got 50 or 60 entrances. You just can't defend it. The Women's Building had a single entrance in the front and then a garage door entrance in the back where you could drive the limo right into the building. No catwalks. It's a much smaller building. And that's why the Kennedy people want to go there. It's very easily defended. The trademark was a nightmare. Anyway, John Connally was behind it. And then you have another Dallas politician, Mayor Earl Cabal, whose brother was fired as the number 3 in the Bay of Pigs disaster. He was the number 3 guy at the CIA. He was fired the same time Dulles was fired, the same time Bissell was fired. General Cabal was fired as well. His brother is the mayor of Dallas. And it turns out, we find out later, he's a CIA asset as well. He's been on the CIA payroll for years. And he's the one, coincidentally, is going to change the motorcade route the night before. So you see what's happening here. These guys all have their part to play. So this sweet 8F Texas gang would probably include in that meeting. LBJ would be there, obviously. John Connally might be there. There's no need for Earl Cabell to be there. J. Edgar Hoover would be there. J. Edgar Hoover is LBJ's best friend. They were neighbors in Georgetown for years. And J. Edgar Hoover hated the Kennedys because the Kennedys were always trying to retire him. He was getting up above the retirement age. And he wanted to stay on as FBI director. And he had to use all sorts of leverage against the Kennedys to keep his job. He was tired of doing it. And of course, with his friend LBJ as president, he knew he would be appointed FBI director for life, which is exactly what happened. And so he's in a position as FBI director to stand down in any of the suspicious behaviors the CIA is involved in. All those doppelgangers running around pretending to be Oswald down in Dallas. All the different machinations of this plot that the FBI would be aware of in their capacity as internal security agents of the United States. They know that the CIA is not supposed to be operating domestically. It'd be very clear to them very quickly that the CIA was operating domestically, and the FBI could become a problem if they didn't have the FBI director's cooperation in this. So he virtually ordered a stand down order and let anything that was deemed CIA activities, he basically told his agents to leave it alone, including witness testimony after the assassination itself, where people had stories to tell about different activities by people that they saw on the grassy knoll or in Dealey Plaza, whom J. Edgar Hoover knew were related to the CIA. He basically told his agents to leave it alone. That was CIA activity. Leave it alone. You know, there is an old understanding. This is why Nixon in 72 in the tapes is heard discussing the possibility of having the FBI or the CIA order the FBI to back off on their investigation into the Watergate scandal. Because there's an agreement between the CIA and the FBI that if a CIA agent does something It draws the attention of an FBI agent or an FBI investigation. If requested by the CIA, the FBI will back off and leave it alone, realizing that this is an operation by a CIA agent or by the CIA itself. Now, understand the CIA is not supposed to be operating domestically. So any CIA activity domestically is going to draw the attention of the FBI, and Hoover is going to be necessary in this whole plot. Rather than sending in agents to investigate or drawing attention to the plot, in order for it to fly under the radar, he's just got to ignore it and have his agents ignore it. And that became sort of the standing order. And then, of course, later, when the Warren Commission begins investigation of the whole affair, where did the Warren Commission get all its evidence? The Warren Commission didn't investigate anything. All they did was look at the evidence that the FBI investigated. So the FBI would supply the evidence, and the Warren Commission would analyze it. But Hoover was the gatekeeper of all the evidence that went before the Warren Commission. And as such, since he was aware in advance of the plot, necessarily, so he could filter out the evidence that led elsewhere and emphasize the evidence that focused on Oswald. And that's exactly what happened. How about the Secret Service? Secret Service was not part of the Suite 8F group officially, but they were the head of the Secret Service was best friends with LBJ. So here you see the guy who's in charge of the Suite 8F group has all these personal relationships. He's friends with Connolly. Connolly was sort of a mentor to Connolly. He was best friends with Hoover. He was friends with James Raleigh, the head of the Secret Service. And so you don't have to corrupt the whole Secret Service. You just got to corrupt the ones at the top. And that was Raleigh. That was Roberts. Emory Roberts was put in charge of the motorcade. One of the first things he did, so we call security stripping. One of the first things he did was strip away the two agents that were supposed to ride on the running boards, right? He was in charge. He worked with Mayor Earl Cabal, changed the motorcade route. All the violations of Secret Service protocols through that motorcade, winding through tall buildings, 290-degree turns, removal of the bubble top, removal of the media flatbed truck in the front so as to open up the field of fire in the front, remove Godfrey McHugh from the front middle of the limo, put him in the back. All of these violations of Secret Service protocol happened on Emory Roberts' watch as he was over the motorcade. Thomas Kelly was sent in after the assassination to control the information, to control whatever media stories were coming out about the Secret Service, make sure the stories benefited the Secret Service, to minimize, there were a lot of mistakes made in the lead up, a lot of hanky-panky that resulted in security stripping that contributed to JFK being so vulnerable. And all the blame should have been laid at the feet of the Secret Service. Thomas Kelly was sent in to Dallas from Washington, sort of a cleanup man, clean up on aisle 5 kind of guy. Elmer Moore was sent in to be the enforcer, to get the doctors at Parkland to change their testimony. They were coming out saying the president had a massive gaping wound in the back. He was hit in the side, exploding bullet. The neck wound was a front shot. They used Elmer Moore as the enforcer to scare the doctors into changing their story. William Greer was the driver, supposed to hit the gas. They replaced the normal driver with Greer, and Greer, of course, hit the brakes, waited 5.7 seconds till a kill shot happened. Roy Kellerman was the guy in the passenger seat who never moved. He's supposed to jump on top of the president at the first shot, never moved. So the corruption of the Secret Service started with the relationship between LBJ and James Raleigh, and then Raleigh passed word down to the ones that were needed to know. And then all of the agents that were in the follow-up car and in Dealey Plaza and in Dallas that day, all they do is follow orders. They replaced all the agents who would know protocols were being broken, experienced agents, with inexperienced agents who wouldn't ever ask any questions. or question any orders, do what they're told. And that's how you take, and to the John Q. public who's standing on the curb watching the motorcade go by, it looks like everything is as normal. It looks like you got all these Secret Service agents crawling around. You got a car behind. You get some motorcycles. You know, that was another thing Secret Service did. They stripped away 8 of the 12 motorcycles. Took all the motorcycles out from out front the limo and side, and only left 4 in the back. Opened up the field of fire. You know, in any shot coming down from a building, a high-rise building in the back, doesn't matter if the motorcycles are in back, they go right over their heads. But the shots from the front and the side were going to be at ground level or close to it. And those motorcycles could be obstacles. So they removed them. And so all you got to do is get Raleigh, and he's LBJ's friend. So you get Raleigh, Raleigh gets Roberts and Kelly and Moore, and then they take out the normal driver, put Greer in. Greer knows what he's supposed to do. Kellerman knows what he's supposed to do, which is sit still, do nothing. And all these other agents are young and inexperienced, literally, because all the experienced ones transferred out or were transferred out or sent on vacation or killed. The driver was killed. So you take the experienced people, replace them with inexperienced people, and you have corrupt heads calling the shots. It's very quickly apparent how the Secret Service was involved in this. And then you have Texas Big Oil. These were in that sweet 8F meeting with LBJ, most assuredly, because these are the money guys. These are the private sector people that make all the money and fund all these covert ops, or this op in particular. That would be Harold Hunt, Clinton, Clint Murchison Sr. Remember the meeting at the party at Clint Murchison's house the night before, November 21st, 1963. Hoover was there, Nixon was there, LBJ was there, on and on it went. All the major players. Harold Dryholzberg, he's the guy who owned the Texas School Book Depository. He's also the one who created the air patrol, the Civil Air Patrol that Oswald had been a part of when he was a kid, under the leadership of David Ferry. That was Harold Dryholzberg brainchild. So far, what we've learned is that if there was such a meeting, you would have Dulles at that meeting. You'd probably have Harvey, maybe Bissell and Helms are there, maybe all the guys in the blue. Dulles, Bissell, Helms, Harvey, Silver. And then you have the Sweet 8F group, which is basically LBJ, Connolly, Hoover's there, Texas Big Oil folks are there. You got your attorneys. LBJ had a whole roster of attorneys. He was a master at hiding behind attorney-client privilege, and so his attorneys basically were criminals. They did all the dirty work for LBJ, and of course you couldn't get to the evidence because it was all hidden under or protected under attorney-client privilege. So they would all be there, and then you had the Joint Chiefs. You say, "Oh my gosh, the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs, the military." Not all of them. Curtis LeMay in particular. And this was necessary because the military was going to be involved in the autopsy. That's how you control the autopsy. You got to have military doctors. And of course, you got to pick military doctors who have no experience with gunshot wounds. And you basically have the autopsy room full of military personnel who are directing the autopsy, telling them what to look for. And because Oswald was recruited originally into the Office of Naval Intelligence, and Army Intelligence would be involved in the search for the suspect after the assassination, the shooting. That's in fact how 14 minutes after the shooting, Dallas police had the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. It came from ONI through U.S. Army Intelligence to Dallas police. So military intelligence was going to have to be complicit in this plot because Oswald himself was in the U.S. Marine Corps. And and several of the other players in this plot had military backgrounds. So military intelligence, so you're going to need the cooperation of the Joint Chiefs, and for the autopsy, that's the most important, but also for the setup of Oswald And then also for the payoff. The Joint Chiefs, in addition to the CIA and a bunch of other people, all these private sector oil people and contractors, etc., wanted a war in Vietnam. And 1 month before the assassination, JFK had signed National Security Act number 263, which said there's not going to be a Vietnam War. He was going to pull out. On November 21st, 1963, the day before the assassination, a new National Security Action Memo was drawn up, National Security Action Memo 273, which reversed 263 and reinstated the Vietnam War policy. And that's interesting because that was the day before Kennedy was shot. This document was drawn up with the intention of being signed by the president. Of course, what they knew was it wasn't going to be Kennedy, it was going to be Johnson. And Johnson was going to give all of these folks involved in this plot the payoff, which was the Vietnam War, which meant buku bucks for the military-industrial complex, for obviously for these for the CIA. It was a CIA war essentially. But Bell Helicopter, if you think about it, Bell Helicopter was on the verge of bankruptcy before Vietnam, and then that became known as the Helicopter War. Saved the company. Today, the company is a big monster. General Dynamics, a big company out of Texas, one of LBJ's benefactors, provided F-111 fighters, made a huge profit as a result. Brown and Root Construction out of Texas, another LBJ benefactor, got the contracts to go over to Vietnam, dredge bays and build bridges and dams and military bases, et cetera, et cetera. Put Brown and Root big time. They were just kind of a local contract, well, a state player, but now they became an international player. I go on and on and on. Oil companies, all those oil benefactors that were part of Suite 8F. Vietnam War was the payoff. So imagine a meeting where these conspirators, now remember, I've listed 5 conspirators, and I have at the top, I have the CIA/Pentagon, and you might just, anyway, that's conspirator number 1. And so you got Dulles there, you got, let's say, Curtis LeMay, the Joint Chiefs there. So there's your conspirator 1 represented. And then conspirator 2, I have organized crime. There's no organized crime figures at this meeting. They don't need to be at that meeting because they have been working for the CIA for years. And all they got to do is tell Johnny Rosselli to spread the word to their people in organized crime after the meeting what their responsibilities are going to be. They don't need to be privy to all the facts. They just need to know what their responsibility, and they're full go on this because they're mad about being double crossed by the Kennedys. And they went back into Cuba and they want relief from the Justice Department. They didn't get either one. And so they were double crossed. So they want revenge. So they'll do what the CIA asks them to do. So you don't need organized crime there. Likewise, you don't need the Secret Service there because LBJ, the 3rd conspirator, is there, and he is best friends with the leader, Raleigh. And so he'll convey, and maybe Raleigh was there, maybe he was, but he didn't need to be there because LBJ is there, and LBJ is his connection. Hoover was there, and Hoover, Raleigh, LBJ, they're all friends. So far you got the CIA/Pentagon there. They need to be there. You got LBJ there. He needs to be there. Secret Service doesn't need to be there. Organized crime doesn't need to be there. Cubans don't need to be there because they literally the mechanics. They carry out the dirty work. They're very motivated. They feel betrayed by Kennedy. Kennedy was supposed to get him back into Cuba. Now he's negotiating a peace deal with negotiating with Castro to recognize his government. They feel betrayed. So really, the meeting is the CIA with their Pentagon cohorts and the Suite 8F people, which would include the financiers, the big oil people, the contractors, LBJ, John Connally, Hoover would be there. And then these folks, once the decision has been made and once the operation has been greenlit, now they go out and they begin rounding up or recruiting into the conspiracy the players that are going to be necessary to carry out the plot. And of course, they keep the circle close. LBJ says, only talks to James Rowley, his friend in the Secret Service. Hoover keeps close to the vest what the FBI's role is going to be. Texas Big Oil, obviously, they've been doing illegal stuff for years, paying bribes to LBJ and Connolly and all this for all their business arrangements, etc. So they know to keep quiet. And then you got the Pentagon. And we already talked about that's Curtis LeMay. So I could see a scenario where this deep state treasonous cabal who put all this in motion involved basically 3 or 4 people. You had to have Dulles. You had to have Hoover. So there's 2. You had to have LBJ. There's 3. And you had to have Curtis LeMay. There's 4. All the others can be brought into the loop by the major players. And it is a blending of public sector, government, both elected and unelected positions, a blending of them with private sector business interests, including companies that hire CIA assets for cover jobs, including oil companies and contractors, military contractors, who provide the money and the financing for this operation, including people like William Pauley, who transports the S-Force around, including people like Mac Wallace, LBJ's personal hitman, who was going to be told by LBJ what his role is to play in this, including all the organized crime elements. Those are all private sector. So that's what the deep state is. It's the unelected, unaccountable people who really run the show. So here you have Kennedy trying to run the country, and you have this unaccountable, unelected deep state, this treasonous cabal conspiring behind his back to commit treason, to betray the country, to overthrow the government, to kill him, president, and by doing so, aid and abet the Cold War enemies. Why? Because the overall goal was to keep the Cold War going as long as possible, because it was financially lucrative. Peace is not profitable. War is. And so, like I said yesterday, they're creating and carrying out their own foreign policy. And now they're committing treason, the highest order against America and Americans, and against their duly elected president. And because they operate by this code, this operating principle, it's about maximizing benefit to me. What is this target that we're targeting? How is he acting as an obstacle to my goals, to the benefits that I want to accumulate for myself? How is he standing in the way of what I want to achieve? And it doesn't matter what the public interest is. Public interest is, hey, we elected him to be our president, to be our leader. Leave him alone. Follow his, we elected him, which means we support his policies, which means we don't support yours. So we want his policies, not yours. They're like, well, screw that. We're going to get it one way or the other, come hell or high water. So they kill him. And it's all about maximizing their benefits. Public interest doesn't matter. And then by putting LBJ in office afterwards, they immunize themselves from any and all liability. It's as I started off saying today, it is the classic manifestation of everything we've been marching towards since the end of the Civil War. A deep state, this unaccountable, unelected elites. Some of them are public sector, some are private sector. They blend together and they run things. They plot, they conspire, and they pull strings. They're the ones running the country. And they're doing it for their own benefits. They don't care about public interest. They never get caught. They immunize themselves. And it doesn't matter whether it's treachery or treason. They're willing. They've already demonstrated in years past willingness to commit treason. And now they're demonstrating a willingness to execute kill the king, the ultimate act of treason. And it all is wrapped up in a bow in this ZR rifle covert operation. All the prior covert ops arguments could be made that they were either treacherous or treasonous. Most of them were treasonous. Arguments could be made that it was a complete blending of the private or public sector, or maybe it wasn't. Arguments could be made that maybe it benefited us in some manner, shape. There's no argument for ZR rifle in any of those cases. And this was strictly an operation to benefit the deep state, and it was the deep state was a blending of private and public. It's all about benefiting them. Public interest didn't matter. They were completely immunized, even from up to and including 4 different kinds of treason. Okay, that's the addendum. I meant to be this 10, 15 minutes. I went way past that. But I hope this completes chapter 34, put the two together, completes the picture that I'm trying to paint of this rogue organization, this rogue entity they now call the deep state, that by the time we get to 63 is just running wild. And it fundamentally changed America's position in the world, and we haven't been the same since. The world hasn't been the same since. I would make an argument that the world needs moral clarity to lead during times of confusion. During World War I, America was that leader. During World War II, America was that leader. America has ceased to be that leader. We've canceled or foreclosed on our own moral high ground with ZR rifle and the assassination of JFK. Because like an emperor with no clothes, everybody knows what happened. Everybody knows around the world. There are still those in America who have their heads in the sand like lemmings and believe whatever the government tells them. But the majority of the American people know. There were polls taken after the Warren Commission published its report that at its heyday, the Warren Commission was only believed by a slight majority of Americans. And then as years went by and more evidence came out, more and more suspicions arose. More and more people died violent deaths related to either witnesses or related to the assassination in some manner, shape, or that the public support for the Warren Commission just dropped like a stone, to the point where by the time we get to the late 70s, the American people demanded another investigation, the House Select Committee. And of course, they came out with the conclusion that JFK was killed by a conspiracy. So we had 2 competing government investigations. One, right in the aftermath, said Oswald acted alone. The other, almost 15, 18 years later, said no, it was a conspiracy. They didn't know who the conspirators were, or they chose not to look that far, but they knew it was a conspiracy. And most people today, when you ask them, know that Lee Harvey Oswald was a patsy. He was set up. So that's the unfortunate byproduct. When you lie, it's like the boy who cries wolf. At some point, people stop believing you. And the government has lied to us on so many occasions about this one event. And then subsequently, because they thought they got away with it, they've lied about others. Then now their credibility is shot. It's just shot. So it reminds me of, every time I think about where we are today as a country, it reminds me of the time in the Old Testament where the Israelis, the Jews, they're always wanting a king. And whenever they didn't have a king, the scriptures say every man did what was right in his own eyes. Because they didn't have a king to enforce the law. They didn't follow the law of Moses. They're just doing what was right in their own eyes. It was chaos. It was anarchy. And that's where we are. Everyone's just doing what's right in their own eyes, because there's no moral authority that we believe in anymore. And not that the government should be our moral authority, but you'd like to believe that you're being told the truth and that there's credibility there and something worth following. And that they're there acting in our best interests. And when you find out and you realize they're not, they're acting in their own self-interest. They don't care about our interests. And that there's a two-tiered system of justice where they always get off. We face the full brunt of the law, and they always get off. When that was this private sector phenomena, people could look at the big bad uh, robber barons and point the finger and say, well, that's a bad person, right? I I don't admire that person, even though he's filthy rich. I don't admire that person because I know how he lives. I know how he operates. I know his code. But when that bled over into the public sector, and now the people you elect are operating the same way, the American people look around and say, who's here representing us? Who here should I follow or should I believe? It's the $1,000,000 question. That's some of what was lost November 22nd, 1963. Okay, that's enough for today. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe to my channel. Please share. Please comment if you find this interesting, and or uh, feel free to smash the like button. That helps me out. Thank you. Have a great day. God bless.